The Man on Bridge Street. The early morning fog rolled thick and heavy across Bridge Street, obscuring the worn cobblestones and the hunched figure of Marcus Connor, who had called this corner his home for the past 3 years. His weathered hands, marked with the story of his 62 years of life, clutched a tattered cardboard sign that read, "Anything helps, God bless." The sign, like Marcus himself, had seen better days, but it remained a testament to his unwavering hope in humanity's kindness. Marcus hadn't always lived on these streets. Once, he had been a respected high school chemistry teacher, with a comfortable home in the suburbs and a family who loved him. But life, as it often does, had other plans. A series of unfortunate events, his wife Sarah's prolonged battle with cancer, the mounting medical bills, and finally, the devastating market crash that wiped out their savings, had conspired to bring him here, to this corner where the old brick buildings loomed like silent witnesses to his fall from grace. Yet despite his circumstances, Marcus maintained a dignity that set him apart from others in his situation. He kept himself as clean as possible, using the facilities at the local shelter when he could. His silver-streaked beard was neatly trimmed, and his clothes, though worn, were carefully mended. More importantly, he carried within him a wealth of knowledge and wisdom that no amount of hardship could take away. On this particular morning, as the first rays of sunlight began to pierce through the fog, Marcus noticed a young woman approaching his corner. She couldn't have been more than 25, with dark circles under her eyes and a defeated slump to her shoulders that spoke of recent hardship. What caught his attention, however, was the way she kept glancing over the bridge's railing, her gaze lingering too long on the churning waters below. Drawing from years of experience reading people, both as a teacher and as someone who lived on the streets, Marcus recognized the signs of someone who had reached their breaking point. Without hesitation, he gathered his few belongings and slowly made his way toward her. "Excuse me, miss," he called out softly, careful not to startle her. "Would you happen to have the time?" The young woman jumped slightly, turning to face him with red-rimmed eyes. She fumbled with her phone, her hands shaking. It's 6:45. Marcus smiled warmly, the kind of smile that had once put nervous students at ease before their first chemistry exam. "Thank you. You know, I've watched thousands of sunrises from this spot, but something tells me this one's going to be special. Would you care to watch it with me?" She hesitated, clearly torn between fleeing and staying. Marcus could see the internal struggle playing across her face. Finally, curiosity seemed to win out. Why would today's sunrise be any different? "Ah, well, that's where science comes in," Marcus replied, slipping naturally into his teacher's voice. "You see, the combination of this morning's humidity levels and the particular type of clouds we're seeing creates the perfect conditions for what we call atmospheric optics. The sunlight will refract through the water droplets in the air, creating a spectacular display of colors." The young woman blinked, clearly surprised by the academic explanation coming from someone in his situation. "You seem to know a lot about this." "I should hope so," Marcus chuckled. "I spent 30 years teaching chemistry and physics before." He gestured vaguely at himself. All this happened. As they talked, Marcus carefully guided them away from the railing and toward a nearby bench. The young woman, who eventually introduced herself as Emily Chen, began to open up about her own story. She had recently lost her job at a prestigious tech company due to downsizing, and with it, her work visa status was in jeopardy. With no family in the country and her savings rapidly dwindling, she felt she had run out of options. "I understand the feeling," Marcus said quietly. "When my wife Sarah was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, I thought my world had ended. The medical bills kept piling up, and even with insurance, we were drowning. After she passed, I couldn't keep up with the payments. Lost the house, the car, everything. But you know what I learned?" Emily shook her head, now fully engaged in his story. "I learned that rock bottom has a purpose. It strips away everything that isn't essential and forces you to recognize what truly matters. And sometimes, just sometimes, it puts you exactly where you need to be to help someone else." As if to punctuate his words, the sun finally broke through the fog, painting the sky in brilliant shades of pink and gold. The light reflected off the river below, creating the promised spectacular display. Emily gasped softly at the beauty of it. "See?" Marcus smiled. "Special indeed." What happened next would set in motion a chain of events that neither of them could have predicted. Emily, moved by their conversation and the shared moment, pulled out her phone again. This time, instead of checking the time, she opened her LinkedIn profile and showed it to Marcus. "I may have lost my job, but I still have my network," she said, her voice stronger now. "And I refuse to believe that someone with your knowledge and experience should be living on the streets. Would you let me help you create a profile? Maybe we could find you some tutoring work or consulting opportunities." Marcus stared at the phone, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. It had been so long since anyone had seen him as more than just another homeless person, so long since anyone had offered him a hand up rather than a handout. But before he could respond, a commotion further down the street caught their attention. A group of school children had gotten off their bus early due to a mechanical problem, and now several of them were horsing around dangerously close to the busy morning traffic. Without thinking, Marcus sprung into action with an agility that belied his age. He rushed toward the children, his voice carrying the authority of his teaching days as he called out, "Step back from the street, now." The children, responding instinctively to his teacher's tone, moved back onto the sidewalk. All except for one young boy, who had stumbled and fallen into the path of an oncoming delivery truck. What happened next would be talked about in the local news for weeks to come. Marcus dove forward, pushing the boy to safety while barely managing to roll out of the way himself. The truck's horn blared as it swerved, its brakes screeching against the wet pavement. In the chaos that followed, parents being called, police reports being filed, and grateful thanks being offered, no one immediately noticed that Marcus had been injured in his roll across the pavement. It wasn't until Emily saw him wincing as he tried to stand that she realized something was wrong. The responding paramedics insisted on taking him to the hospital, despite his protests about not having insurance. As they loaded him into the ambulance, Emily caught his hand. "I'm coming with you," she said firmly. "And don't worry about the bills. After what you did today, and what you did for me this morning, well, let's just say I'm not the only one with a network." As the ambulance pulled away from Bridge Street, neither Marcus nor Emily could have known that this was just the beginning. Their chance encounter on that foggy morning would spark a movement that would change not only their lives but the lives of countless others in ways they couldn't imagine. The story of the homeless hero who saved a child's life would soon go viral, but it wasn't just the heroic act that would capture people's attention. It was what came after, the revelation of who Marcus Connor really was, and how a single act of kindness could set off a chain reaction of positive change throughout their community. But for now, as they made their way to the hospital, Marcus held on to one simple truth: he had been right about this sunrise being special. Not because of the atmospheric optics he had explained to Emily, but because it had marked the beginning of something extraordinary, a reminder that sometimes, hope comes from the most unexpected places, and heroes can be found even among those society has forgotten. The afternoon sun had replaced the morning fog by the time they reached St. Mary's Hospital. As the paramedics wheeled Marcus through the emergency room doors, Emily walking alongside, neither of them realized that their story was already spreading through social media, carried by the parents of the children who had witnessed Marcus's heroic act. The first chapter of their journey was ending, but the real story was just beginning to unfold. The bustling emergency room seemed to pause for a moment as Marcus was wheeled in, his worn clothes and weathered appearance contrasting sharply with the sterile hospital environment. But there was something in his bearing, a quiet dignity that commanded respect despite his circumstances. Emily noticed how the hospital staff responded to him, not with the dismissive attitude sometimes shown to homeless patients, but with genuine concern and professional courtesy. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the attending physician who examined Marcus, turned out to be another piece of the puzzle falling into place. As she reviewed his injuries, several bruised ribs and a sprained wrist, her eyes widened at the name on his chart. Marcus Connor, she asked, looking at him with growing recognition. Did you teach chemistry at Roosevelt High about 10 years ago? Marcus nodded, wincing slightly as he shifted on the examination table. I did, yes. For quite a few years, actually. I was in your AP chemistry class, Dr. Martinez said, her professional demeanor momentarily giving way to enthusiasm. You're the reason I went into medicine. That project you had us do on the biochemistry of pharmaceuticals, it completely changed my perspective on what was possible. Emily watched this exchange with growing interest, her journalist's instincts tingling. Here was yet another layer to Marcus's story, not just a homeless man who had performed a heroic act, but a teacher who had shaped young minds and inspired futures. She could see the potential narrative taking shape. How many other former students of his were out there? How many lives had he touched before circumstances had forced him onto the streets? As Dr. Martinez finished her examination and prescribed treatment, she paused, seeming to struggle with something. Finally, she spoke again, her voice softer. Mr. Connor. I don't know what happened that brought you to this point, but I want you to know that your influence extends far beyond what you might realize. There are at least 3 other doctors in this hospital who were your students. The impact of her words was visible on Marcus's face, a mixture of pride, sadness, and something else, hope, perhaps. Emily found herself reaching for her phone again, but this time not to check social media. Instead, she opened her notes app and began typing frantically. This story needed to be told, and it needed to be told right. As the day wore on and Marcus was admitted for overnight observation due to concerns about potential complications from his injuries, Emily began making calls. Her journalistic background and network of contacts, which had seemed useless after losing her job, suddenly became invaluable. Local news stations were already picking up the story of the homeless hero, but Emily knew there was so much more to tell. She spoke with the parents of the boy Marcus had saved, with witnesses from the scene, and even managed to track down a few more of Marcus's former students through social media. With each conversation, the picture became clearer. Marcus Connor wasn't just a man who had fallen on hard times, he was a thread that ran through the community in ways no one had realized. As evening approached, Emily returned to Marcus's hospital room to find him sitting up in bed, looking uncomfortable in the hospital gown but cleaner than she'd seen him that morning. The hospital staff had helped him shower and shave properly, and without the layers of street grime, she could better see the person he must have been before, the respected teacher, the caring mentor. The nurses tell me you've been busy, he said as she settled into the visitor's chair beside his bed. Emily nodded, pulling out her notebook. I hope you don't mind, but I've been talking to people about you. Your story, it's important, Marcus. Not just the rescue this morning, but all of it. People need to hear it. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, looking out the window at the setting sun, so different from the sunrise they had shared that morning. You know, he finally said, when Sarah, my wife, was sick, one of the hardest things was feeling like we had lost control of our own story. The medical bills, the bankruptcy, the foreclosure, it all became about numbers and procedures and policies. We stopped being people and became cases to be processed. Emily leaned forward, sensing the importance of what he was saying. And now? And now? He smiled slightly. Now I think maybe it's time to reclaim that story. Not just for me, but for everyone who's ever found themselves in a similar situation. Because the truth is, Emily, what happened this morning on that street, that wasn't just about me saving that boy. It was about you too. Me? Emily blinked in surprise. Yes, you. You were ready to give up this morning, but instead, you stopped to listen to an old homeless man talk about atmospheric optics. You chose to help someone else even when you were struggling yourself. That's just as important a part of this story as anything I did. As they talked into the evening, neither of them noticed the television in the corner of the room, where the local news was already running the first reports about the hero of Bridge Street. They didn't see the social media posts that were beginning to go viral, or the former students of Marcus Connor who were starting to connect the dots and share their own stories. They didn't know that across town, in a modest office building, the CEO of a local educational technology company was watching the news with growing interest, recognizing in Marcus's story an opportunity to do something meaningful. They couldn't have known that in the hospital's administrative offices, Dr. Martinez was already in discussions with her colleagues about starting a program to provide medical care to the homeless population, inspired by her former teacher's situation. The seeds of change were being planted, spreading out in all directions like ripples in a pond. But for now, in that quiet hospital room, Marcus and Emily simply talked about life, about second chances, and about the strange ways in which hope sometimes finds us just when we think we've lost it completely. As night fell over the city, Bridge Street lay empty for the first time in 3 years without its familiar guardian. But something had changed there too. The spot where Marcus had kept his vigil no longer seemed like just another corner where the forgotten gathered. Instead, it had become a place where a small miracle had occurred, where two lost souls had found hope in each other's stories, and where a chain of events had been set in motion that would remind an entire community about the power of human connection and the unexpected ways in which heroes emerge from the shadows of society. The first part of their story was ending, but the real transformation was just beginning. As Marcus drifted off to sleep in his hospital bed, Emily continued writing, determined to capture every detail of this extraordinary day. Neither of them could have known that their sunrise encounter was about to spark a movement that would change not only their lives but the lives of countless others in their community and beyond. Ripples of change. The story of Marcus Connor exploded across social media overnight. Emily's carefully crafted article, published on her personal blog and shared through her professional networks, had struck a chord that resonated far beyond their local community. By morning, national news outlets were picking up the story, drawn not just to the dramatic rescue but to the deeper narrative of a former teacher who had touched so many lives before falling through society's cracks. Marcus awoke to find his hospital room filled with flowers, cards, and messages from former students who had recognized him from the news coverage. Among them was a particularly interesting letter from James Chen, the CEO of EDU Tech Innovations, and, as it turned out, Emily's older brother. "I had no idea you were related to him," Marcus said, looking up from the letter at Emily, who was organizing the growing collection of well wishes. She smiled sheepishly. "I didn't mention it because, well, we haven't been on speaking terms lately. He didn't approve of my career choice in journalism, wanted me to join his company instead. But when he saw my article about you, he called me for the first time in months." The letter in Marcus's hands represented more than just another well-wish. It contained a job offer, not a token position or charity, but a real opportunity to help develop an educational program for underprivileged students. James Chen had recognized that Marcus's unique combination of teaching experience and first-hand knowledge of hardship could bring invaluable perspective to their educational initiatives. But Marcus's attention was drawn to something else entirely. As he read through the mounting pile of messages, a pattern began to emerge. Many of his former students weren't just expressing gratitude or sympathy, they were sharing stories of how his teaching had influenced their lives in unexpected ways. Dr. Martinez wasn't the only success story. There was Michael Zhang, now a research scientist at NASA, who credited Marcus's chemistry demonstrations for sparking his interest in rocket propulsion. Lisa Rodriguez, an environmental lawyer, wrote about how Marcus's lessons on chemical pollution had inspired her career choice. Even Tommy Parker, the class troublemaker who had seemed destined for failure, had gone on to become a high school science teacher himself, directly inspired by Marcus's patient mentoring. As Emily helped him sort through the messages, she noticed something in Marcus's expression, a mix of pride, wonder, and growing determination. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I'm thinking," Marcus replied slowly, "that maybe James's offer isn't quite enough. Don't get me wrong, it's incredibly generous, and I'm grateful. But reading these letters... Emily, do you realize how many of these students came from disadvantaged backgrounds? How many of them succeeded despite the odds? Emily nodded, beginning to see where he was going. And you think there are more stories like theirs out there? I know there are. For every student who made it to college and a successful career, there were others who had just as much potential but lacked the support system they needed. And now. He gestured to the letters scattered across his hospital bed. Now we have proof of what's possible when someone believes in you. Over the next few hours, as doctors came and went with their rounds, Marcus and Emily began to formulate a plan. It started with James's offer, but it grew into something much bigger. They envisioned a program that wouldn't just help underprivileged students with their studies, but would connect them with successful professionals who had overcome similar obstacles. Emily's journalistic instincts kicked in, and she began mapping out how to tell this larger story. It wasn't just about one homeless man's act of heroism anymore, it was about the invisible threads that connected people across social and economic barriers, and the transformative power of education and mentorship. As they talked, they were interrupted by an unexpected visitor. Sandra Thompson, the mother of the boy Marcus had saved, stood in the doorway with tears in her eyes. Behind her stood her son, Tommy, clutching a handmade thank you card. I'm sorry to intrude, Sandra began, but we had to come back and thank you properly. And, there's something else you should know. She paused, gathering herself. I'm on the city council, Mr. Connor. After what happened yesterday, I did some research. The statistics about homeless individuals in our city, particularly those who became homeless due to medical debt like yourself, they're staggering. We've been approaching this all wrong, treating it as a law enforcement issue rather than a community health crisis. Marcus and Emily exchanged glances. Their plan was already growing beyond what they had imagined. Sandra Thompson's position on the city council opened up possibilities for systemic change that they hadn't dared to hope for. As the day wore on, more visitors arrived. Dr. Martinez returned with several of her colleagues, wanting to discuss their ideas for a medical outreach program. James Chin himself made an appearance, leading to a tearful reconciliation with his sister and an expanded discussion about educational access and technology. But perhaps the most significant visitor was Robert Kincaid, a local documentary filmmaker who had seen Emily's article. He arrived just before visiting hours ended, pitch in hand, eager to capture what he called a story about the ripple effects of compassion in action. Think about it, he urged them. We follow not just your story, Mr. Connor, but the stories of your former students, the people they've helped in turn, and this new initiative you're planning. We show how one person's influence can spread outward in ways they never imagined. Marcus, overwhelmed by the day's events, looked out his hospital window at the setting sun. 24 hours ago, he had been showing Emily the beauty of a sunrise from his corner on Bridge Street. Now, he was at the center of what was rapidly becoming a movement for social change. You know what this reminds me of, he said quietly. In chemistry, there's this concept called a catalyst, a substance that speeds up a reaction without being consumed by it. It creates change while remaining essentially itself. He turned back to the room full of people who had gathered around his hospital bed. Maybe that's what we all are, catalysts for change in each other's lives. Emily, who had been taking notes throughout the day, looked up from her notebook. That's it, she said excitedly. That's what we'll call it, the Catalyst Project. A program that combines education, mentorship, healthcare access, and community support, all growing from this one moment on Bridge Street. The energy in the room was palpable as everyone began building on the idea. Sandra Thompson started discussing policy changes that could support the initiative. James Chin offered to provide technological infrastructure and funding. Dr. Martinez and her colleagues committed to organizing medical professionals willing to donate their services. Robert Kincaid's camera captured it all, documenting the moment when a group of strangers from different walks of life came together, inspired by one man's unwavering dignity in the face of hardship and his instinctive act of heroism. As visiting hours came to an end and the room slowly emptied, Emily stayed behind to help Marcus sort through the remaining messages and cards. They worked in comfortable silence until Marcus spoke up. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "when Sarah was sick, she used to talk about silver linings. Even in her final days, she believed that something good could come from our struggles. I thought she was just trying to make me feel better about what was happening to us. But now," he gestured to the plans they had sketched out over the course of the day, "now I wonder if she knew something I didn't." Emily reached over and squeezed his hand. "Maybe she did. Or maybe she just knew you better than you knew yourself, knew that you'd never stop being a teacher, never stop trying to help others, even when you had nothing left to give but knowledge and kindness." As night fell over the city once again, the wheels of change were already in motion. News outlets were picking up the expanded story of the Catalyst Project. Social media was buzzing with offers of support and similar stories of unexpected heroes. Former students were organizing fundraisers and volunteer groups. But in that quiet hospital room, Marcus Connor finally allowed himself to rest, secure in the knowledge that sometimes the darkest moments in our lives are simply the prelude to our greatest opportunities to make a difference. The corner on Bridge Street where he had spent 3 years might have seemed like rock bottom, but it had turned out to be precisely where he needed to be to spark a movement that would change countless lives. And somewhere, he liked to think, Sarah was smiling, knowing that her belief in silver linings had been right all along. The ripples of change were spreading outward, touching lives far beyond that foggy morning on Bridge Street, proving that sometimes the most powerful catalysts for positive change come from the most unexpected places. Building bridges. 3 months after the incident on Bridge Street, Marcus Connor stood before a crowd of over 500 people in the newly renovated community center. The building, once a deteriorating structure on the verge of being condemned, had been transformed into the headquarters of the Catalyst Project, thanks to generous donations and community support. Marcus adjusted his new glasses, a gift from an optometrist who had been one of his former students, and looked out at the sea of faces before him. The audience was a testament to how far they'd come: homeless individuals seeking help, volunteers ready to serve, former students now successful professionals eager to give back, and community leaders committed to making a difference. "When I was teaching chemistry," Marcus began, his voice steady despite his nerves, "I always told my students that the most powerful reactions often start with the smallest molecules. 3 months ago, on a foggy morning, I was just one such molecule, existing on the margins of society. But through an extraordinary series of events, we've proved that theory correct in ways I never imagined." Emily sat in the front row, her laptop open as she documented everything. The documentary crew, led by Robert Kincaid, moved quietly through the crowd, capturing the historic moment. In the months since that transformative day in the hospital, their initial idea had grown into something far beyond their original vision. The Catalyst Project had evolved into a comprehensive program with 3 main initiatives. The first, spearheaded by James Chen's EDU Tech Innovations, focused on education and job training. They had developed a revolutionary platform that connected homeless individuals with online learning resources and mentorship opportunities. The second initiative, inspired by Dr. Martinez and her colleagues, had established a network of medical professionals providing pro bono services to the homeless community. They had already helped dozens of people address chronic health issues that had kept them trapped in poverty. The third initiative, championed by Sandra Thompson and the City Council, worked on policy reform and housing solutions. They had already succeeded in converting several abandoned buildings into transitional housing facilities, each equipped with computer labs and classroom spaces. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the Catalyst Project was its ripple effect throughout the community. Other cities had begun reaching out, wanting to implement similar programs. Major corporations, inspired by the project's success, were creating job programs specifically designed for individuals transitioning out of homelessness. As Marcus continued his speech, he shared some of the success stories from their first 3 months. There was David, a former software engineer who had lost everything to addiction but was now clean and working as a coding instructor in their program. Maria, a single mother who had been living in her car with her 2 children, was now in stable housing and completing her GED. But it wasn't just the homeless population that was being transformed. The project had created unexpected connections throughout the community. Successful professionals who volunteered as mentors found their own lives enriched by the experience. Students from local schools who participated in community service projects gained new perspectives on poverty and social justice. Emily's ongoing coverage of these stories had earned her national recognition, leading to a book deal and speaking engagements across the country. Her reconciliation with James had grown stronger as they worked together on the project, their different skills and perspectives combining to create something neither could have achieved alone. As Marcus concluded his speech, he introduced a special announcement. "Today, we're launching the Sarah Connor Memorial Scholarship," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This fund will specifically support students facing medical hardship, ensuring that no one else has to choose between education and healthcare, between their future and their family's survival." The announcement was met with thunderous applause, but Marcus wasn't finished. He gestured to a group of people standing at the side of the stage, former students who had gone on to become doctors, scientists, teachers, and business leaders. One by one, they came forward to share their stories of how Marcus had influenced their lives, and how they were now committed to paying that influence forward. After the ceremony, as the crowd mingled and networked, Marcus found himself back in his old teaching role, but with a different kind of student. He was showing a group of homeless individuals how to use the new computer system, explaining complex concepts with the same patience and clarity that had made him such an effective teacher years ago. Emily watched him from across the room, taking notes for her book. She had come to understand that the Catalyst Project wasn't just about providing services or creating programs, it was about restoring dignity, rebuilding connections, and recognizing the potential in every person, regardless of their circumstances. Robert Kincaid's documentary crew captured a particularly poignant moment when one of the computer students, an elderly woman named Grace, suddenly recognized Marcus from their shared time on the streets. "You used to share your coffee with me on cold mornings," she said, tears in her eyes. "You never knew, but those small kindnesses kept me going." The interaction perfectly encapsulated what the Catalyst Project was all about, the recognition that every act of kindness, no matter how small, had the potential to create lasting change. Marcus had been paying it forward long before he became the hero of Bridge Street, through countless small acts of compassion that had gone unnoticed but not unfelt. As the day wound down, Marcus took a moment to step outside. The community center was just a few blocks from his old spot on Bridge Street. The corner looked different now, a small plaque had been installed commemorating the event that had sparked the Catalyst Project, and the area had been transformed into a pocket park where people could rest and reflect. Emily found him there, staring at the plaque. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, sitting beside him on one of the new benches. "I was just thinking about Sarah," he replied. "She always believed that education was the key to breaking cycles of poverty and hardship. She would have loved all of this." He gestured at the bustling community center behind them. "But I think what would have made her proudest is how many people have come together to make it happen." Emily nodded, understanding. The Catalyst Project had become more than just a program, it had become a movement, a testament to the power of human connection and the enduring impact of compassion. It proved that sometimes the most profound changes begin with the smallest acts of kindness, and that heroes can emerge from the most unexpected places. As they sat there, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors reminiscent of that fateful morning 3 months ago, they could see people entering and leaving the community center. Each person carried with them a story, a potential for change, a chance to be part of something bigger than themselves. The documentary crew, setting up for one final shot of the day, captured this moment, Marcus and Emily on the bench, the transformed community center in the background, and the steady stream of people moving between them, each one a potential catalyst for change in someone else's life. Robert Kincaid, watching through his viewfinder, smiled as he realized he was capturing not just the end of another day, but the continuing beginning of something extraordinary. The Catalyst Project was proving that while one person might spark a change, it took an entire community to turn that spark into a lasting flame. As night fell over the city, the lights of the community center glowed warmly, a beacon of hope and possibility. Inside, volunteers were setting up for the next day's programs, mentors were scheduling sessions with their ments, and plans were being made for future initiatives. Marcus Connor, once a teacher, then a homeless man, and now something altogether different, a catalyst for change, a bridge between worlds, reminder that every life has value and purpose, looked at it all with a sense of wonder and gratitude. He had lost everything once, but in that loss, he had found a new purpose, a way to create positive change that would ripple outward for generations to come. And somewhere, he was sure, Sarah was smiling, knowing that even in their darkest moments, they had been part of something greater than themselves, a chain reaction of compassion and change that would continue to transform lives long after that foggy morning on Bridge Street. Expanding horizons. 1 year after the founding of the Catalyst Project, Marcus Connor found himself standing in front of a very different audience, the United Nations Assembly in New York. The small ripple that had started on Bridge Street had grown into a wave of social change that was now attracting international attention. Robert Kincaid's documentary, The Bridge Builder, had premiered at the Sundance Film Festival 6 months earlier, winning both critical acclaim and the Audience Choice Award. The film had masterfully captured the evolution of the Catalyst Project, weaving together the stories of dozens of lives transformed through its programs. Now, as Marcus prepared to address world leaders, he couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd come. A wise person once told me that rock bottom has a purpose, Marcus began, his voice steady and clear. It strips away everything that isn't essential and forces you to recognize what truly matters. But what I've learned over the past year is that rock bottom isn't just about personal discovery, it's about perspective. Sometimes you need to be at the bottom to see the foundations of our society clearly, to understand where the cracks are, and most importantly, to recognize how we can repair them. In the audience, Emily sat next to her brother James, both of them beaming with pride. Her book, The Catalyst Effect, How One Act of Kindness Changed a City, had become a national bestseller, sparking conversations about homelessness and social responsibility across the country. James's EduTech innovations had expanded their educational programs to 20 different cities, with remarkable success rates in helping homeless individuals transition back into the workforce. The Catalyst Project's three-pronged approach, education, healthcare, and housing, had proven so effective that it was now being studied and replicated worldwide. Dr. Martinez's medical outreach program had become a model for cities across the globe, while Sandra Thompson's housing initiatives had influenced policy changes at both state and federal levels. But it was the human stories that truly demonstrated the project's impact. Marcus shared some of these with the assembly. There was Peter Wong, a former engineer who had lost everything during the tech bubble burst. Through the Catalyst Project, he not only found stable housing and employment but also developed a revolutionary app that helped homeless individuals locate nearby resources and support services. Maria Gonzalez, the single mother who had been living in her car, was now running the project's childcare program, allowing other parents to attend classes and job training without worrying about their children. Her own kids were thriving in school, with her oldest daughter recently receiving a full scholarship to study social work. David Chen, the recovered addict who had become a coding instructor, had expanded his program to include mental health support alongside technical training. His innovative approach to rehabilitation through education had achieved unprecedented success rates. But perhaps the most powerful story was that of Grace Williams, the elderly woman who remembered Marcus's small acts of kindness from their shared time on the streets. She had become the project's most effective advocate, speaking at schools and community centers about the importance of seeing the humanity in every person, regardless of their circumstances. As Marcus continued his address, he emphasized that the Catalyst Project's success wasn't just about the programs they'd created or the people they'd helped directly. It was about changing the way society viewed and approached homelessness and poverty. We've proven that homelessness isn't just a housing issue, or a healthcare issue, or an education issue, he explained. It's a complex web of interconnected challenges that requires a holistic approach. But more importantly, we've shown that every person has the potential to be a catalyst for positive change, regardless of their current circumstances. The presentation included live video links to Catalyst project centers across the country, where similar transformations were taking place. In Seattle, a tech industry partnership was providing cutting-edge job training. In Miami, a medical school had integrated homeless healthcare into their curriculum, inspired by Dr. Martinez's program. In Chicago, a former student of Marcus's had adapted the project's model to focus specifically on homeless veterans. After the formal presentation, during a private reception, Marcus found himself surrounded by international delegates eager to implement similar programs in their own countries. Emily watched as he handled each conversation with the same patience and wisdom he had once shown his chemistry students, breaking down complex social issues into manageable components. James approached his sister during the reception, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You know," he said, "when you first wrote that article about Marcus, I thought we were just going to offer him a job and maybe start a small educational program. I never imagined it would lead to all this." Emily smiled, watching Marcus draw diagrams on a napkin as he explained the project's infrastructure to a group of interested delegates. "That's because you were thinking like a CEO," she replied. "Marcus thinks like a teacher, he sees the potential in everything and everyone. He understood that education isn't just about transferring knowledge, it's about building bridges between people and possibilities." The reception was interrupted by an unexpected announcement. The United Nations had decided to create a special task force on homelessness and poverty reduction, with the Catalyst project serving as its primary model. Marcus was being offered a position as special advisor, while still maintaining his role as the project's director. As the news spread through the room, Robert Kincaid's camera captured the moment when Marcus, overwhelmed by emotion, stepped out onto the building's terrace for some air. Emily followed him, notepad in hand. Some habits died hard. "How are you feeling?" she asked, finding him looking out over the New York skyline. Marcus was quiet for a moment before responding. "You know what I keep thinking about? That morning on Bridge Street, when you were ready to give up, and I started talking about atmospheric optics." He chuckled softly. "I was just trying to keep you there long enough to see the sunrise, to give you a reason to hold on for a few more minutes. I never imagined that those few minutes would change everything." Emily finished for him. "Not just for us," Marcus nodded. "For thousands of people we've never even met. It's like that chemistry lesson about catalysts came to life in ways I never expected." The New York sunset painted the sky in familiar shades of pink and gold, reminiscent of that fateful morning that had started it all. But now, instead of two lost souls finding hope in each other's stories, they were part of a global movement that was redefining how society approached its most vulnerable members. Inside the UN building, delegates were already beginning to plan the implementation of Catalyst project-inspired programs in their own countries. The ripple that had started on Bridge Street was about to become a tidal wave of positive change, proving that sometimes the most powerful catalysts for social transformation come from the most unexpected places. As night fell over New York City, Marcus and Emily rejoined the reception, where the work of expanding their vision continued. The Catalyst project was entering a new phase, moving from a local success story to a global model for social change. And at its heart remained the simple truth that had started it all, that every person, regardless of their circumstances, has the potential to be a catalyst for positive change in someone else's life. Full circle. 5 years had passed since that foggy morning on Bridge Street, and the world had changed in ways that neither Marcus Connor or Emily Chen could have imagined. The Catalyst project had evolved from a local initiative into a global movement, with centers in over 50 countries and a network of millions of volunteers and beneficiaries. On this particular morning, Marcus stood once again on his old corner of Bridge Street, but the scene was remarkably different. The Pocket Park had grown into a full community garden, complete with a small amphitheater where educational programs were held outdoors during good weather. The plaque commemorating his rescue of Tommy Thompson had been joined by dozens of others, each telling a story of lives transformed through the Catalyst project. Emily, now a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and author of 3 books about social transformation, stood beside him, recording this moment for the 5th anniversary documentary. Robert Kincaid's original film had spawned a series of follow-up productions, each capturing new aspects of the project's impact. "It feels different now, doesn't it?" Emily asked, watching Marcus take in the changed landscape. "Everything's different," he replied, "and yet somehow, it's come full circle." He gestured to a group of students gathering in the amphitheater. "See that woman leading the chemistry lesson? That's Maria's daughter, the one who got the social work scholarship. She's teaching science to homeless youth now, just like I used to teach her mother." The morning's gathering was special. It was the inaugural session of the Global Catalyst Academy, a new initiative that combined in-person and virtual learning to connect students worldwide. Through holographic technology developed by James Chen's company, students from Catalyst centers across the globe could attend classes together, breaking down geographical and cultural barriers while building a truly international community of learners. As Marcus and Emily watched, the air above the amphitheater came alive with projected images of students from Tokyo, Lagos, Sao Paulo, and dozens of other cities. The lesson today was particularly fitting: the chemistry of catalytic reactions, taught by a team of teachers who had all once been homeless themselves. "You know what's remarkable?" Marcus said, his voice soft with wonder. "Every person you see teaching here today was once told they had no future. Now they're shaping the future for others." The Catalyst project had indeed come a long way from its initial 3-pronged approach. While education, healthcare, and housing remained core components, the project had expanded to include the Catalyst Innovation Lab, where former homeless individuals worked alongside tech professionals to develop solutions for social challenges. Their latest project, a blockchain-based system for tracking and coordinating homeless services worldwide, had won multiple international awards. The Sarah Connor Global Health Initiative, which had grown from Dr. Martinez's original medical outreach program into a worldwide network of healthcare providers offering services to homeless populations. They had recently pioneered a revolutionary approach to mobile medical care that was being adopted by governments around the world. The Bridge Builders program, inspired by Sandra Thompson's housing initiatives, which had transformed abandoned urban spaces into sustainable communities that integrated housing, education, and employment opportunities. Their model had been so successful that it was now being studied in architecture and urban planning schools globally. But perhaps the most significant development was the change in how society viewed homelessness. Through the project's emphasis on human dignity and potential, combined with Emily's powerful storytelling and the global reach of their programs, they had helped shift the narrative from one of helplessness and despair to one of resilience and possibility. As the morning's lesson concluded, Marcus was approached by a young man he recognized, Tommy Thompson, the boy he had saved on Bridge Street 5 years ago. Now a college student studying social work, Tommy had become one of the project's most passionate young advocates. "Mr. Connor," Tommy said, greeting him with a warm hug. "Mom wanted me to remind you about the city council meeting this afternoon. They're voting on the expansion of the Bridge Builders program." Sandra Thompson had gone from city council member to state senator, using her position to advocate for policy changes that supported and expanded the Catalyst project's initiatives. Her son's near-tragic experience and subsequent transformation into a social advocate had become a powerful testament to the project's impact on entire families and communities. As they walked together toward the community center, now a bustling hub of activity, they passed several familiar faces. Grace Williams, now in her 70s but still full of energy, was teaching a group of elderly homeless individuals how to use the latest technology to connect with their families. David Chen was leading a coding workshop, his students a mix of homeless individuals and corporate professionals learning side by side. Inside the center, the walls were covered with photographs, a visual timeline of the Catalyst project's journey. There was the original group from the hospital room where it all began, the opening of the first community center, the UN presentation, and countless images of lives transformed along the way. James Chen, who had flown in for the anniversary celebrations, met them in the main hall. The years of working on the Catalyst project had changed him as much as anyone else. The hard-driving CEO had become a passionate advocate for social entrepreneurship, using his business acumen to create sustainable models for social change. "Ready for the big announcement?" he asked, greeting his sister with a hug. Emily nodded, her journalist's instincts tingling. The day's chemistry lesson had been just the beginning. The real news was what they were about to reveal to the world, a revolutionary expansion of the Catalyst project that would take their work to an entirely new level. As they prepared for the press conference, Marcus took a moment to visit a special room in the community center, a small museum dedicated to the project's history. At its center was a simple display, his old cardboard sign reading "Anything helps, God bless," preserved alongside Sarah's photograph. "She would be so proud," Emily said softly, joining him at the display. "Not just of what you've built, but of how many lives you've touched along the way." Marcus smiled, touching the glass case gently. "You know what Sarah used to say? Teaching isn't just about passing on knowledge, it's about passing on hope. I think that's what the Catalyst project really is, a way of passing on hope, one person at a time." As they walked toward the press conference, Marcus reflected on how far they'd come from that foggy morning 5 years ago. The homeless man who had once been invisible to passers-by was now a globally recognized advocate for social change. The journalist who had been ready to give up had found her voice and used it to change the narrative around homelessness. The corner where they had first met had become a symbol of transformation and possibility. But more importantly, they had proven that no one is ever truly lost, that rock bottom can indeed be a foundation for rebuilding, and that sometimes the most powerful catalysts for change are the people society has forgotten to see. As Marcus took the podium to make the announcement that would launch the next chapter of the Catalyst project, he looked out at the faces in the crowd, former students, project beneficiaries, volunteers, supporters, and most importantly, the next generation of catalysts for change. Each person represented a story of transformation, a ripple in the ever-expanding wave of positive change that had started with a simple act of kindness on Bridge Street. 5 years ago, he began, his voice strong and clear, "I stood on a corner not far from here, believing I had nothing left to give. Today, we stand together as proof that everyone has something to contribute, that every life has value, and that the power to create positive change exists within each of us. We are all catalysts, all bridges, all teachers and students in the great classroom of life." As he continued his speech, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a familiar golden light across Bridge Street. And in that moment, just as he had shown Emily 5 years ago, the beauty of a new dawn reminded everyone present that sometimes the darkest moments are simply the prelude to our greatest opportunities to make a difference in the world. The story of the unexpected hero who had paid it forward without knowing had come full circle, but it was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning, as each new person touched by the Catalyst project became a catalyst themselves, creating an endless chain reaction of hope, transformation, and positive change that would continue to ripple outward for generations to come.